Welcome to this ATA Insights webinar. Thank you for your ongoing interest and support of our webinar program. Today's session will begin in 2 minutes. ATA Insights Webinars is an online platform for the dissemination of professional renewable energy knowledge across international borders. Our aim is to democratize access to information, for innovation to spread faster, and to make the industry more competitive. And we do this through our online sessions, open to all our members. Every year we do more than 100 sessions with over 250 speakers, 50,000 attendees from more than 50 countries. To participate in the session today, use the chat on the right-hand side to introduce yourself, your company, and where you're joining from. Under the screen, you will find the Q&A box, where you can send your questions for the speakers. We will get to as many as we can today. We're recording this session, and we will send you a link to the materials in a few days. Please consider supporting our content creation for the webinar program. Contact us on the email on screen.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are connecting from. Welcome to today's online session by ATA Insights. As you can see on screen, today we'll be talking about Cape Town and how they're transforming the electricity market. So, well, before we get started, I'd just like to remind you that this is being recorded. So you will get the recording and the slides in a few days' time, and also that we have a tradition here at ATA Insights that we ask all our participants to introduce themselves using the chat. So let us know where you are connecting from using the chat function. So you'll be able to, the final thing, you'll be able to send questions through the Q&A function before we start. So, today, as you can see on screen, we have 3 experts from the city of Cape Town who will be telling us about the work they're doing to make the electricity supply more secure and cleaner. So, as you can see on screen, there's Mary Haw, Kadri, Nassiep, and Prins. So, I'll get you to introduce yourselves. So in the order in which I see you on screen. So, Mary, could you please briefly introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thanks, Carlos. And thanks to everyone for joining. My name is Mary Haw. I am from the city of Cape Town, and I manage the Sustainable Energy Facilitation branch. And really what we're looking at is the interface between our customers and the city officials, and how we can facilitate better energy decision-making for our customers. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. And Shane, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Carlos. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Prins. I'm the Manager for Generation Development and Municipal Energy Efficiency within the City of Cape Town. As the title implies, I'm accountable for the development of new power generation assets for the city, as well as the rollout of the energy efficiency program across the city. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Shane. And then Kadri, if you could introduce yourself and then get ready to present, because you are the first one. So,
Carlos, thank you so much, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Kadri. I'm the Executive Director for Energy. My role really is just to oversee the transition within the city of Cape Town from a less sustainable energy system to one which will hopefully be a future-fit, resilient one going forward. So obviously joined today by 2 of my colleagues, Mary and Shane. We're going to be spending a bit of time taking you through some of the details on what I'll be touching on in my presentation. So I think on that note, Carlos, maybe I can then continue with loading the presentation.
Yeah, so I'll stop sharing now, so you can start sharing your slides and begin your presentation.
Well, thank you so much. So hopefully it'll be up on your screen soon.
Yeah, I can see it now. It's not on full screen yet, but there we go. Perfect.
Great stuff. Thank you, Carlos. All right. Yeah. And as I said to you, it's great to join you guys today, especially since I have two very capable colleagues with me that's going to take you through a lot more detail than I am this morning. My brief is really just to give you an overview of where we are with the energy system in Cape Town, and primarily focusing on what our objective is when it comes to the transition that we're undertaking at the moment. And I'd like to start off by just encapsulating effectively a vision. I like the slide because it really tells us exactly where we see ourselves by 2050. I'm not sure how many of us will be around in 2050, but certainly this is the goal that we've set ourselves for the city, to create this open, vibrant marketplace that is resilient, resilient to energy scarcity, resilient to climate change impacts, and also looking at the implications around health and poverty related impacts. So for us, we are quite progressive in the way that we're approaching the problem, and we have put together quite a few interventions that are going to hopefully talk to meeting this particular goal that we have set ourselves. This is just a summary slide that we've put together that gives you a good indication overall of what it is that we're focusing on as a city. And in order to get ourselves to the point where we can achieve some level of independence or self-reliance in the energy space, we have opted for a number of solutions, both on the supply and on the demand side. And these solutions are actually tailored towards ensuring that the marketplace is open. As I've said to you earlier, it's important that we have this open marketplace. It's also important that the city leads by example. So particularly on the energy efficiency side, we have our own goals in respect of making our buildings, our own public buildings, energy efficient and net zero carbon by 2030. And then there's of course the broader objective of making all the buildings in the city net zero carbon by 2050. On the supply side, there's a number of very interesting developments that are taking shape at the moment, and Shane will have the opportunity later to talk through some of those, as well as Mary, that will be talking particularly around on the small scale side, where there's been, I think, some exciting developments that have been taking shape. Certainly on the demand side, we've not neglected that area, and our focus now very heavily on increasing the scale of the energy efficiency interventions within the city, but also looking on the demand response side and actively engaging the market, both residential and the commercial industrial customers, with the view to supporting us on that. Also, what is quite critical to note is that in order to get there, it's a partnership between stakeholders, and we see communication and collaboration as the key towards enabling and achieving these goals. I also mentioned up front that resilience for us is a huge objective, and aligned to that, of course, is our climate change action plan that's been put together and launched over the past 12 months. And within that, within the context of that climate change action plan, we have just over 100 interventions on the mitigation and the adaptation side that are designed to ensure this transition to a more resilient community within Cape Town. So this is for us very important, and aligned to that would be then the interventions for the zero emission side for our buildings, and then a lot of the solar related work that takes place in parallel to that, also with an eye on the commercial customers that are some of our primary contributors towards ensuring security of supply going forward. There's some information that is available to you that you are welcome to access, particularly our Cape Town State of Energy and Carbon, which is filled with very useful statistics, and we invite you all to go and have a look and get a little more sense of what's taking shape within Cape Town. There are a number of publications. Mary's been instrumental in producing quite a few of those, and you have access to all of that on our website as well. But I'd just like to take you very briefly through our energy strategy in terms of where do we see ourselves going and what's driving us in that particular direction. So one of the key things for us, and these all happen to start with D, so it makes it quite easy, certainly to look at our networks and to ensure that they are future fit, doing that through digitalization amongst other interventions. Certainly some of our processes require this as well. particularly on the supply side and on the registration of processes. If I look at decentralization, and there's a strong drive for this both nationally and internationally, and we see, I think, a great opportunity for decentralizing energy systems within the city. There's also opportunity to introduce disruptive technology in environments and in markets where they have an niche role to play. And currently, we're working towards establishing a framework for how those disruptive technologies can be adopted. Central to our goals, as I've mentioned time and time again, is the issue around decarbonization and moving towards a more resilient future. And so on the mitigation side in particular, decarbonization is one of our key objectives. Lastly, very important that we have this inclusive marketplace and that we allow for participation from various sectors, various customer classes. And so democratization also then becomes an important facet in terms of other trends that we would be adopting and following very carefully. Just to give you a quick indication of where we are in terms of energy consumption and what we are about to try and change. Certainly, liquid fuels makes up the largest contributor towards our energy consumption. And so this is one of the key areas within the city that's receiving a lot of attention, and hopefully we'll be looking at mobility solutions that are going to make a rapid change in that space. Particularly hydrogen and electric vehicles are gaining a lot of attention in that particular space. On the electricity side, looking primarily, of course, at the interventions on the energy efficiency side, particularly demand response, and then also to look at the contribution that small-scale embedded generation can make towards reducing our demand for electricity from a single supplier. So we have a number of interventions designed to alter this picture in line with more sustainable fuel usage going forward. Now, when we consider some of our other contributions that are being made in this space, what underpins all of this is the mayor of the city of Cape Town, Jordan Hill-Lewis, his commitment towards ending load shedding. Load shedding, of course, is the practice in South Africa, if you're not aware of it already, which is a series of controlled interventions to drop demand so that the network itself can remain operational and we don't experience a whole system-wide blackout. And in order for us to end load shedding, we have to put in place a number of initiatives, which Shane will be speaking to. But across the program itself, we have this new energy strategy that we're working on, the load shedding work, which Shane will talk about, the power utility reform, which is really modernizing our networks and ensuring that they are future fit, and in the small-scale embedded generation program and the streamlining of that. And Mary will be taking us through that. And just to give you a bit of brief context as to why this is so important, as you would see, and this particular graphic comes from, I think, 2021, but it does give you a good indication of how load shedding has increased over the past few years. 2022 is the worst on record already, and we've even had up to stage 6 load shedding, which is the worst case that we've experienced ever, and we've had significant increases in the amount of load shedding in that area. Going forward, for us, it's important that we put together dispatchable energy solutions that are going to allow us to decouple from the national grid and to provide for energy availability during load shedding periods. So it has to be dispatchable, has to be affordable and reliable. And this has become, I think, a mantra that we are following in terms of the energy system going forward. I mentioned to you earlier that 2022 is the worst on record, and you can see we're not even finished with the fourth quarter of this year, and already you can see the significant rise in load shedding over last year, and the outlook isn't much better going forward. So in terms of what we know and what we understand going forward, we know that the utilities performance, Eskom's performance, is not going to improve over the short term. In fact, the availability factor continues to decrease, and the utilization factor of these older stations continues to decline. At the same time, we know that the problem isn't so much power availability as it is energy. The power that is installed on the network, the capacity is sufficient to meet our winter peak demand. However, the energy that's available from those plants is certainly not sufficient. And that really just says to us that we need reliable energy available all the time, which is our dispatchable energy, and it must be supplied in large enough quantities to make a meaningful contribution. And that really is the fundamental and driving principle behind our programs to reduce the impact of load shedding. So I'm going to wrap up very briefly by saying to you that in our goal towards a new self-reliant energy system, the vision that we've set ourselves is energy security for Cape Town, and various commitments are being made. I've touched on a few of those. One important one is alleviating energy poverty. We're recognizing, of course, the dire predicament that many of our communities face in respect of the availability and pricing of energy. And so we have a whole dedicated work stream looking at ways and means of providing sustainable energy solutions to these communities. One of the key aspects to consider under our enablers is this culture of learning and innovation. Cape Town always strives to be innovators and pioneers. And so we also encourage that in terms of the collaborative partnerships that we are looking to establish. And just lastly, just to note that under this framework for action, very important for us that there's a holistic approach taken to all of these solutions, that these solutions are not just introduced by the city as an administration, but also through collaboration and through effective government action. So we see ourselves as key enablers of a transition. We see ourselves as key partners to ensure that that transition does happen. And we also see ourselves as off-takers of that solution. So there's a holistic and I would say a nexus approach that's being taken towards energy sustainability within the city of Cape Town. And you'll see now from the next slides, which are going to be presented by Shane, that there's some exciting developments in that space that talks to a model that could well be replicated in other cities in South Africa, or for those that find themselves in a similar situation outside of the country as well. On that note, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time. And of course, we'll be here to answer questions throughout the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kadri, for your presentation. I have actually shared the link that you've just shown on screen in the chat, so people can get access to those reports and all of that. And yeah, without further ado, I'll give the floor to Shane. So I can see your presentation is, you just need to turn it to full screen now. And you're on mute, by the way, so if you can unmute your microphone, Shane. So yeah, next to your, there we go. I think.
Is that better?
Yeah, now your microphone is on, so we can hear you. So and then yeah, if you click on the full screen, there we go. Perfect. I can see.
Excellent.
So
thanks, Carlos. Thank you. Kadri has already done a lot of the introductory work in terms of forming and showing the context within which we're developing our various programs. So I will touch very briefly on the energy security imperatives, what I call it, that the city is pursuing. And of course, this is primarily linked currently to the load shedding situation in the country, but we also have a longer term view in terms of having some level of independence within the city as compared to being fully dependent on the national utility. What's happening at the national level, of course, we have no control over, but we have seen over the past number of years a decline in performance at Eskom. And of course, this translates into various areas of serious concern within the city as far as the impact on our economy, as far as the impact on our residents are concerned, as well as sustainability of our energy utility itself going forward. So we, as Kadri has pointed out, we have seen a decline in the energy availability factor and a commensurate increase in terms of the utilization of the coal fleet, which is also aging to some extent, which does not bode well for the longevity of these machines. So what we have at currently, we could potentially see widespread generator outages across the country if this trend is not arrested. So over the short to medium term, we don't foresee an improvement in Eskom technical performance. We dearly hope that we are wrong. But as a city, we feel it's our responsibility to make sure that we take the necessary steps in order to try and mitigate this risk as far as possible. Kadri has already touched on this specific point that speaks to the load shedding level we've seen across the country. Of course, 2022 was already the worst on record, and I've seen some scary statistics from one of my colleagues this morning. In fact, we're looking at a tremendous increase in terms of load shedding for 2022. Again, we've already touched on this specific slide. I just wanted to maybe mention or highlight some elements around the characteristics of load shedding that we've seen over the past number of years. Previously, in around 2000, 2007, 2008, load shedding was primarily a summer phenomenon, and it was primarily an issue around system peak because our reserve margin was very low at that point in time. What we have right now is load shedding is not only used to protect system frequency over peaks, but it's also used as an energy management tool to manage the low reserve levels at Eskom, whether it's as far as hydro pump storage is concerned, or as far as the diesel levels at our existing open cycle gas turbines. So the characteristics have really changed over the past number of years. It's becoming more severe. We have seen extensive stage 6 load shedding a few months ago. And stage 4 has, for all intents and purposes, been normalized in the country. A very, very worrying trend. Load shedding periods, of course, is lasting longer now. Previously, we had that for a few days on end. We've recently had 30 days of continuous load shedding within the country. And of course, it's also decoupling from seasonality. As I've mentioned, it was previously primarily a summer event. Nowadays, we get load shedding basically during any season in the country. So our response has taken into account all of these factors to try and come up with a plan that is going to really carry us through, taking into account the changing characteristics of this phenomenon that's impacting us severely. As a city, over the short term, we have got two major levers available to us. We can utilize our existing infrastructure in terms of generation assets, as well as primarily looking at the demand response program. So the city is quite fortunate in having available a fairly large battery. This is at the Steenbras Hydro Pump Storage Station. It's 180 megawatts pump storage facility that the city is using extensively to counter the effects of load shedding. So we are able, for extended periods, to mitigate against up to two stages of load shedding within the city, and we are looking at potentially using this asset even more extensively in future. So, for example, we've implemented a new operating regime at the station where we are reserving additional units. We are planning a major refurbishment exercise to extend the life of plant at Steenbras, as well as looking at various other potential options that we can utilize to get more energy out of this specific installation. So this is the single biggest load shedding mitigation lever we have available to the city in the short term, and we really hope to extend and optimize utilization of this going forward. Secondly, over the short term, the city has launched a demand response program where we are targeting residential as well as small commercial customers. At this point in time, we're in the market right now, in fact, and we're targeting about 60 megawatts of demand response, which closely aligns with a single stage of load shedding, especially during winter periods. So our intent is to contract with customers through an aggregator that agreed to be curtailed, and they will have some level of incentive offered by the aggregators to them, depending on whatever their contractual arrangements are. But more importantly, from a city perspective, it's important that we get the message out there that signing up to this specific program also offers a different type of incentive to customers. If we are able to get enough customers to actually sign up for this program, the city should be able to give a substantial relief as far as load shedding is concerned. As I've said, if we reach a full stage of 60 megawatts, that is a full stage of load shedding, and everyone from residential to commercial to industrial customers would benefit from that. So we are, of course, quite keen to also have a large power user demand response program that can dovetail with this specific program. But the city, as I've mentioned, is in the market right now, and we're hoping to get some good response going forward. Of course, the city has launched earlier this year an embedded IPP procurement program where we are targeting lower carbon technologies from IPPs for up to 200 megawatts. Energy cost savings will be a significant benefit that we're chasing as far as this specific program is concerned. But of course, we also want to get the electrons onto our system as quickly as possible. So we have introduced a tariff regime that hopefully will encourage IPPs to participate such that we can get not only low in carbon technology energy, but also energy over peaks. And we're hoping again to get to sign off on some longer term contracts with these selected IPPs during the course of 2023. We are actually wrapping up the first stage of our evaluation of the submitted bids as we speak. In fact, we're having a further meeting on this specific issue tomorrow. And hopefully we can then move speedily towards negotiations as well as signing off on PPAs. Just to note that the response from the market has been very encouraging. We've been massively oversubscribed, in fact. So there's very little doubt in my mind that the city will be re-engaging the market quite shortly, so we can get additional contracts and additional electrons onto the network. In line with our energy security imperative, the city is developing a dispatchable IPP program, and it really relates to having availability of energy as and when we require it, in line with the current load shedding operating regime within the country. So over the medium to long term, the city has really got two choices. It must either self-build or it needs to buy dispatchable high capacity factor energy. So capex burden on the city is a major deciding factor for us. We will be technology agnostic, but the requirements of the city must be met by the bidders. We must be able to generate for extended periods in line with what we're seeing in terms of load shedding characteristics, as well as must be dispatchable in order for us to meet the requirements as far as load shedding rules are concerned. So of course, the impact on the tariffs for the city remains a key consideration, but we will be testing the market to make sure that we have a competitive process so that we really try and minimize the full tariff impact of this as far as possible. But also to note that a program of this nature has significant catalytic potential for economic growth within the city as well as the province, depending on the related infrastructure that needs to be established to enable this program to succeed. The city also has an own build program. So we are pursuing own generation projects, the first of which is Atlantis. So we are planning a 10 megawatt solar PV plant at Atlantis. It's on the outskirts of the city of Cape Town. This will be a first of a kind for the city, of course. And it really, the intent is to make sure that we have established our internal processes and systems and capacity to eventually go to much larger scale programs. This specific power plant, it has been developed fully already, and we are on the verge of now moving into the phase we will start construction during the course of 2023. So the successful development of this specific power plant really will serve as a quote-unquote proof of concept for the city, so we can go to much larger scale projects that can have a significant impact in terms of both our decarbonization as well as our energy security in the future. So in that regard, the city is also developing a much larger scale project. This is at Paardenvlei. It's a large piece of land owned by the city in the Somerset West area. And we've already identified suitable land parcels for us to establish a 50 to 60 megawatt solar PV plant. We will pair this plant, it's our full intent to pair this plant with battery storage, depending on the timing and the financial justification for that, whether or not we have it as part of the initial scope or whether we retrofit it later on. So again, we are hoping to reach final investment decision on this project during the course of 2024 with commercial operation of the power plant probably about 2 years later. So this will be a significant step up for the city and hopefully will lead to even bigger and better things in this specific sphere. The city also has a small-scale embedded generation program where we are looking at the installation of rooftop and small ground-mounted PV systems at our own facilities. Mary will touch later on in terms of the incentives that the city is offering and enabling for private customers to follow the same route. Suffice to say here that we have already developed the first phase of this program, and if all goes according to plan, we should be finishing up the last installation during the course of June 2023 next year. As far as battery energy storage system is concerned, the city has developed a roadmap for the implementation of battery storage systems at utility scale. This, of course, is seen as a major component of our energy resilience strategy within the city. Where we are right now, we've gone through various iterations in terms of identifying the most suitable locations for these devices. And we will now conduct some detailed location analysis, especially the techno-economic analysis of the various locations that we've already identified, and with the intent to actually go to market during the course early in 2023 for us to pursue the rollout of this program. We are also looking at what I call own generation activation. So the city is looking at other measures to try and make sure we utilize every single resource at our disposal to get as many megawatts onto the system and as quickly as possible. So we do have existing hydropower installations across the city, and we are currently conducting a fully fledged feasibility study to identify which of these installations can either be upgraded, can be replaced, refurbished, or we're also looking at potential new installations for hydropower that can potentially yield probably up to 10 megawatts of baseload power for the city. We have already launched at least one waste to energy power plant, and we're looking at further developments of other facilities across the city over the next 5 to 10 years. The city also has an energy efficiency program, as I've mentioned at the beginning. Primarily has been focusing on the retrofitting of lighting systems as well as HVAC systems at our own facilities. And the intent is really to go much bigger now. So we are conducting quite an in-depth feasibility study with the assistance of the IFC, looking at how much larger industrial type installations, our wastewater treatment works, as well as water treatment plants, to look at any and all opportunities for us to implement energy efficiency measures that can really bring down the energy requirements of these facilities with the commensurate decarbonization goals being met, as well as energy cost savings. So we are looking at various elements around the proper or the most feasible locations, what technologies should be installed there, what are our funding options as a municipality, what is the size of the program, as well, of course, the phasing of the rollout to try and optimize as fast as possible. So IFC has appointed certain consultants that we're working with quite closely, and this work should be completed by the end of 2022, after which this should be translated into implementable and practical programs and actual projects. I think this is my last slide, or second last slide, least cost optimization. All of these elements, all of these programs I've just unpacked very quickly should lead us to the point where we can actually deploy our resources during periods of load shedding in an economically optimized manner. So we will be conducting a least cost optimization study during the course of December, after which hopefully we'll end up with a basket of options available to our network control center during any period of load shedding for them to deploy these resources in order for us to get mitigation against load shedding by up to 4 stages, which is the goal in a few years' time. I think this is my last slide. Within the power industry, of course, all of these decisions being made as far as investments are concerned have got some long-term ramifications, and the city is quite cognizant of that. Even though load shedding mitigation is a prime objective of us now, we have to be cognizant of the fact that it does have long-term ramifications as far as the network, the required investments, as well as us meeting our stated objectives of, for example, net zero carbon buildings by 2030 and by 2050. So I have conducted our initial, what we call a electricity pathway study with the assistance of the CSIR, and the intent is to keep on updating this specific study and its results, and eventually translate that into implementable programs and projects that can stand the city in good stead to meet 2 key objectives: energy security over the next 15 to 20 years, as well as the meeting of our climate change mitigation objectives. Thank you, Carlos. I will leave it there. And again, at the end of the session, we are available for any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Shane, for your presentation. It really shows all of the work that you're doing at the City of Cape Town to increase energy security. And well, now I'd like to give the floor to Mary Haw. So Mary, over to you.
Thanks, Carlos. Can you see my screen there?
Yeah, I can see it
All
clearly.
set to go. Great. Hi again, everyone. I'm going to be talking about some of the behind the meter strategies that we're looking at. So as I mentioned, I interface with the customer and what City is doing, and Shane provided extensive information on some of the city-owned projects, but I'm looking at some of the work we're doing to facilitate customers making changes and what that means for us. I'll also touch on some of the challenges, because I think it's not plain sailing, some of the, what we're trying to do, and it's helpful to also share where things are difficult, because I think in a lot of municipalities and a lot of countries are going through similar challenges, and we need to work together. So Kadri painted quite a good picture of where we want to go, but I also just want to remind everyone that it's more than just what the city can do. Each and every decision that we make is also about what the customer needs to be involved in. And so I think this kind of image of a future Cape Town where customers are working closely with the municipality, it's a very inclusive city and it's a climate friendly city, is really where we want to go. So we recently, a few years ago, launched the Let's Act for a Stronger Cape Town communication campaign, which is all around resilience, our efforts towards carbon neutrality, and a lot of the work that we're doing really fits into that to get the customers on board for this.
I care about Cape Town and its people, so I'm acting against climate change. We've already experienced some of the impacts, but even our small actions can help. So let's act against climate change, for a stronger city, for water resilience, more efficient transport, for clean energy, and less waste. Let's protect our coastal areas and build a city for the future. Let's all do it. Let's act for a stronger Cape Town.
So that's just a short intro of some of the communication work that that's underway. It's a little bit dated now with people in masks, but hopefully we don't go back to that. But what I'm really focusing on this afternoon is talking about the embedded generation work that we are looking at in the City of Cape Town. So the City of Cape Town supports small-scale embedded generation, or SSEG, and we were one of the first municipalities in South Africa to create regulations and develop guidelines on how to do this. There was a gap of national regulatory information and how this should be done. So City of Cape Town kind of took it upon ourselves to really articulate how we would accept embedded generation from private sector players into our own network. We also set up the required metering, so the bidirectional metering, which allows customers to both import and export electricity, and then the associated billing for that as well. So customers could obviously purchase electricity from the city, but then also sell their electricity back and be credited on their electricity bills. And we had the approved tariffs that were linked to that as well. And so that happens regularly to update the tariffs. So in terms of what the city allows embedded generation, as of quite recently, September this year, the national government, they sort of took all restrictions away from embedded generation size in terms of what NERSA generation licenses were required. So in theory, any sort of system size is allowed, but obviously it does depend on where you are in the network and what the network can handle in that space. And then we do have some restrictions around net generator requirements as well. So when we talk about SSEG, or small scale embedded generation, we're typically talking about systems smaller than 1 megawatt or 1 MVA. And then the systems that are bigger than 1 MVA or 1 megawatt are typically embedded generation capacity. And the different types of systems are grid-tied systems, which are directly connected to the city's network with or without reverse flow blocking. So that would allow you to feed into the system or not. And then a grid-tied hybrid system, which is similar, but has a battery system connected and can operate during load shedding. What's important for people to understand is that a typical grid-tied system without batteries cannot operate during a load shedding scenario. A standby system, these are becoming quite popular, and this is where you can either use your PV system, your PV battery system, or the grid, but never at the same time. And so these systems are a little bit trickier because you do need a changeover switch so that it's safe to use either or. And what's really important is that every single one of these systems does need to be authorized by the city before installation. And I will touch on some of these challenges going forward in some future slides on this. But what we have seen is a rapid increase in the number of installations and the number of applications. So this graph shows the approved grid-tied, commissioned, embedded installations. As of August this year, we had a total of just over 2,600 systems that were approved and commissioned, and those are the grid-tied systems. And that equates to a capacity of almost 86 MVA. Just to note that we have a lot of applications in the system, or they're not only grid-tied, so almost 7,000 applications are kind of in the system as well. So what, as I mentioned, we're seeing this exponential growth, and this graph doesn't even show the full picture. What is really interesting, although not really surprising, is that the majority of the applications, so almost 70%, are coming from residential customers, but these are very small systems. So they only make up about 10% of the installed capacity. So again, when we're looking at, getting installed capacity onto the grid versus keeping customers happy, they're actually different audiences. So if the objective is getting installed capacity on the grid, we should be focusing on commercial and industrial installations. But actually, the customers that are taking up all the time for our employees and our officials is really the smaller systems. And so we are looking at trying to streamline the approvals process, because the vast majority of residential customers are the ones that are sort of the burden to our officials, and they don't represent a huge installed capacity. Unsurprisingly, the growth of PV is very geographic. So we can see nodes of growth. This is both due to socioeconomic statuses. So those dark blue areas are typically wealthier areas in Cape Town, where we see people can afford embedded generation. But there's also been quite a few studies that have shown as your neighbor gets PV, so you become more comfortable with the technology, you speak to them, and then you are more likely to put it on yourselves. So we can see that growth in nodes, and this obviously has an impact on the network. So our network designers and our network controllers, they also need to be aware of this trend and make sure that the network can handle this. I think one thing I do just want to point out is that in South Africa, we have this tendency, and I'm not sure if it's similar overseas as well, but to talk about off-grid systems. And actually, in an urban context, there is no such thing as off-grid. If you have a property that has a grid connection, no matter what system you put on your property, it will impact the network, unless, of course, you are physically disconnected. But in most cases, that is highly, highly unlikely. So I think we need to start moving away from this idea of all being little islands and of having off-grid systems, and rather talk about self-generation or hybrid systems or sort of UPS or standby systems. What we really want is a strong integrated grid. We don't want hundreds of standalone systems that are inefficient, expensive, and really difficult to manage. The future grid that we all talk about and that we want to see is one that is connected. We want to see active buyers and sellers and traders. We want resilient and secure networks and energy supply, and we want smart data-enabled grids. We want our infrastructure, whatever infrastructure we're putting in, whether the city's putting it in or whether private individuals are putting it in, we want it to be working in an optimized fashion and not oversizing things because we don't want to connect to our neighbors and our networks. So some of the challenges that we are dealing with and how we're trying to address them is that I touched on the fact that there are, while we have had exponential applications received, there are still many, many, many unregistered systems in the city of Cape Town. And we've done some investigation into this, and this is largely because of the sort of panic around load shedding right now. And there are hundreds of small installers who just don't have they want to make the sale really quickly. And so they're trying to just get panels on roofs, basically, and they're not ticking all the boxes. So we do have quite an extensive communication campaign underway, and hopefully that will assist, but it is a sort of an ongoing problem. One of the big challenges, and this was alluded to in Kadri's presentation around the SSEG streamlining work for the Mayor's Priority Programme, is that the registration process takes quite a long time. And so it's an area of work that we are working on quite hard to make it much easier for customers to register their systems. For a number of reasons, but primarily the transparency of where you are in the process, what information is outstanding, because we have found that quite often the bottleneck, the customers think that the bottleneck's at the city, but actually the city officials are waiting for information from the customer. So hopefully through a more automated process, we can make that information very clear and upfront. We're also looking at trying to standardize what systems can be applied for, and this should hopefully avoid some of the iterations between the city and the customers where we either don't trust the information coming through, or the information coming through doesn't match what's on site. So hopefully with a more standardized system, we can improve some of that. And then this will allow for a much quicker turnaround, which allows customers to then go ahead with the installation. A big challenge, and this is much more than a City of Cape Town challenge, it's actually a national challenge, is just the poor quality assurance in the industry. There is very little management of installers and of the quality of installations going in. And we are currently engaging with a number of different organizations trying to get to the bottom of this, of who takes responsibility and how we actually manage. There are really great installers, and there are also a lot of less great installers. And I think the industry, in order to stay positive and provide us with what we need to make sure that actually the installations that are going in are safe and quality. So it's really important that customers and installers and the city all work together to ensure that we have safe, legal, and robust electrical systems and networks. We can't do this on our own. I'm going to touch briefly on battery storage, but I know that Shane covered most of it, so I sort of don't have to cover it too much. But I think it's important for customers to understand that the role that batteries play. So in this, at the moment, with the strong emphasis of energy security to mitigate the effects of load shedding, it's really important to understand that grid-tied systems without batteries will not protect against load shedding. So if the grid goes down, your inverter turns off and your PV system goes down too. And I think, installers are not telling their customers this necessarily. So it's important that customers do understand. If you do have a hybrid system that has a battery, then when the grid goes down, your PV system can switch over and it can still continue to work. So the battery, from a individual household level, it's the batteries that are going to protect you through a load shedding scenario, and not the PV panels themselves. So what we're looking at is there's a number of research elements underway, and I think Shane touched on this first one, which is the possible incentives around battery storage and some of the larger scale battery opportunities. And this is all linked into the battery storage roadmap that's underway. On the small scale side, the behind the meter options, we're also looking at what battery energy storage systems are available and what are the sort of incentives or co-ownership models that can be used to really promote customers putting in batteries. And the idea here is that the city could potentially make use of batteries that are installed during non-load shedding times. They could use those batteries for grid services. And I think there's some interesting models there on how you pay for that, and how you how the customer benefits and how the city benefits on those installations of the batteries. So I think there's some interesting research work that's happening there as well. And then finally, I just wanted to share some links of some of the resources we've created. I know that the audience is not mainly from Cape Town, but it's quite useful maybe to have a look at some of the work that we are involved in, and we are very happy to share some of this work that is underway. So those links will lead you to some great resources as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mary, for your presentation. So to everyone in the audience, so we'll share these slides with you, so you'll be able to click on those links and get the reports and all the information that Mary just referred to. So we actually have about 10 minutes left, and there are a few questions here. I think I'd like to start with a question that I think many in our audience would like to hear about, and that is how many megawatts, what capacity does the city of Cape Town need? How much do you think you will be procuring for in the next 5 to 10 years? And if you can, you can all turn your cameras on, and we'll just have a chat now, and I'll direct questions at you. So I don't know who would like to take these questions. Yeah,
I'll start, and then my colleagues can always chip in as they go along. So I think there isn't an easy answer to that. I mean, if I look at what our maximum demand is, in winter our maximum demand is about 1,800 megawatts, and in summer it's about 1,500 odd megawatts, and that's really just for city supplied customers in essence. There are discussions at the moment at a very early stage with Eskom regarding the handing over of some Eskom supply areas to the city. But as I said, it's at a very early stage. So a lot of our tenders are going to make inroads in terms of those numbers that I've mentioned to you now, but not necessarily intended to completely replace the power that we get from Eskom. That wasn't the intention. Certainly within the next, I would say, 4 years or 5 years up until 2027, the idea is to stabilize the system to the point where we have less and less incidences of load shedding on our network. So the IPP tender that Shane has alluded to, the non-dispatchable one, that's about 200 megawatts. And as Shane has said, we will probably go back to market since we are oversubscribed. So we will try and get more power. And then on the dispatchable side itself, we may go out for 500 megawatts, but at the same time, we may leave the door open for even larger projects to come through, depending on the price as well. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Kadri. I don't know if Shane or Mary would like to complement this answer.
Carlos, not really. I think Kadri has covered it. Just to underline, it's not an easy answer. There's no easy answer to that, because it does bring into play various other elements that we have to try and balance, including the cost impact to the city, as well as how that gets passed on to our consumers. There's also elements around network stability that we have to consider, especially as we get larger and larger penetration of renewable energy into our grid. We have to make sure we can still sustain the stability of the network on any given day. So it's not an easy question to answer, but we are definitely looking at procuring significantly more from what we started.
Thank you, Shane. Well, I have about 10 follow-up questions of my own, but this webinar is not for me, it's for the people who signed up. So let's go through some of the questions that we have here on the list. There is one by Matthew Mann, and it says, do you have any idea of how much the capacity of residential and commercial systems has been reduced due to net metering restrictions?
I'll try and answer that, but it's sort of a bit of how long is a piece of string. Based on there's another question actually that I'm trying to answer here. So the mayor had an announcement that we were going to get rid of the net consumption requirement, so allow customers to be net generators. There are some regulatory hurdles and process hurdles that we need to overcome before that is actually kind of in play. But we did have a call out to commercial and industrial customers to register on the city supplier database to actually make that possible. And based on the information provided or the kind of feedback, we don't believe that the kind of net consumption restriction has a huge impact on the available capacity. And I say that obviously with a lot of caveats because we don't really know. But I think for most, 9 times out of 10, people are sizing their systems based on their own consumption and not because of the feed-in tariff, because actually the feed-in tariff is usually quite a lot lower than what you would be buying your system, you're buying your electricity from. So you actually want to size your system for your own, to cover your own consumption. And I think, the commercial industrial customers are really where I think the potential is more viable. And so that's why we're starting there. On the residential customers, I think we're going to run into grid constraints before we run into rooftop constraints. So the net, quite often that net consumption limit is not because the city doesn't want you to. It's, I think the grid constraints, they are going to be hit first.
Right. Thank you very much, Mary. So, well, we have a few more questions here, but I think there is one by Paul Chilton, which is he talks about whether, I think it talks about the cost criteria. So it's a very, very long question. It says, will the city consider time of electricity supply from IPPs? In essence, I think what he's trying to say is whether you'd be willing to go for electricity sources that might be more expensive, but would enable you to save more in the long run.
Yes, Carlos, I can tackle that. The city has done exactly that. Our proposed tariff regime that was offered as part of our IPP procurement program launched in Feb does incentivize for IPPs to actually assist us over peaks. So our analysis or our evaluation in terms of the price offering that will eventually be coming from the IPPs will be in relation to what we pay Eskom as far as our time of use tariff is concerned. So there could be a scenario where in terms of rands and cents, a certain offer could be cheaper, but another offer is accepted because it offers us much larger benefit as compared to what we would pay Eskom. So we have tried to incorporate that in terms of what we've put out to market. It's not a flat rate that we're necessarily looking for. We're looking for a solution that can offer us the most benefit as far as our energy cost impact from Eskom is concerned.
Right. Thank you very much, Shane. I think one question I have actually is that you mentioned your energy efficiency program, and I wanted to ask you: is there still scope for significant energy efficiency savings within the city of Cape Town?
Absolutely. So over the past number of years, we have had an energy efficiency program, but as I've mentioned, it's been fairly restricted. It's been fairly limited in the sense that based on our available funding, as well as available human resources, we've targeted primarily retrofitting of lighting systems as well as HVAC systems. But going forward, and based on the results of the work that's being done now under the guise of the IFC, we're hoping to dramatically expand that over the next few years. Of course, any project must still have a sound business case in terms of the proposed investment from the city as compared to the energy cost savings. But we foresee significant upside potential there, yes.
Thank you, Shane. And another thing that came to mind is that, well, we have seen in other markets, we've seen these in Australia, in certain cities in Australia, where they have encouraged rooftop generation or smaller scale generation that changes the dynamics of the market. So you end up having a lot of electricity produced by PV during the day, and that means that, well, what used to be your peak demand time is not that anymore. So have you considered that in your studies? Have you thought, well, how having all of these rooftop PV will affect the market within Cape Town?
Definitely, and my colleagues can always jump in here, but from where I'm sitting, as far as a stable operation of the power network is concerned, your storage becomes a key element in terms of soundly managing that. We are fortunate. We've got a very big battery that we can deploy for different purposes. But of course, we are also embarking on a utility scale battery energy storage program that will also, with time, assist us in terms of managing that exaggerated duck curve that could potentially we be facing with. Kadri, want to add on to that?
The famous duck curve that they talk about.
Yeah.
I think you've covered it, Shane. Yeah, well done. Thanks.
Great. Well, I think we're kind of getting to the end of our allotted time for these webinars. With all good things, these webinar must also come to an end. I don't know if there is anything you would like to highlight before we leave. Just as a parting message to the audience.
If I could, Carlos, just to point out, I mean, I know that there's still probably some unanswered questions, and I think we'd be happy to engage with delegates if we could get a summary of those questions and pass those responses on. I think we've tried to make this as transparent and inclusive process as possible, and so we'd welcome the continued dialogue and exchange in that space, but also just to thank you, Carlos, Lucia in particular as well, for the arrangement around this particular webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Co-presenters, of course.
Thank you, Kadri. So yeah, we'll send you the questions so you can answer them via email as well. And I think your contact details are on the presentation slides, right? If I remember correctly. So those in the audience will be able to get in contact with you through there as well. I don't know if Mary or Shane, if you'd like to say anything before we leave.
No, from my side, I'm covered. Thanks, Carlos. Thank you for the opportunity. Much appreciated.
Yeah, from me, thanks very much for having us, and thanks for the insightful questions as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And well, thank you to everyone who connected today, who tuned into this webinar, and thank you, Shane, Mary, and Kadri for your insightful presentations. So as you know, this has been recorded. You will get an email with the recording and the slides. And well, if you like this type of content, you can find more at our website, atainsights.com. So see you next time. Thank you very much.